Great. Now, a Bible reading. So this morning I'm going to be giving a one-off talk on the habits of the heart and the head, and specifically looking at prayer. So it's a one-off kind of standalone sermon. And so I've got two readings, one from the book of, or the letter to the church in Philippi, and the other from Genesis. So start and finish pretty much of the Bible. So this is the reading from Philippians, chapter 2. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honoured him far beyond anyone or anything ever, so that all created beings in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow and worship before this Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honour of God the Father. And now from Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman, "Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "Not at all. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, don't eat from it. Don't even touch it or you'll die." The serpent told the woman, "You won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil." When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realised what she would get out of it, she'd know everything, she took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, and he ate. Thanks.
Father, thank you for your word. Again, thank you for each other and your spirit working here amongst us this morning. Amen. Hi again, everyone. This morning I'm doing something a little bit different in terms of the sermon. I'm really keen to talk about the power of habits, and specifically habits when it comes to our spirituality, our faith journey, if you like. And this morning I'll specifically be looking at the habit of prayer. So the first part of the talk is going to be looking at habits in general, if you like, and the second half is going to be looking at prayer. And just quickly, there are a couple of reasons, just by way of background, as to why I wanted to look at this. We got some feedback from the report back, and we've had some feedback on some of the other sermons we've done this year on deep and thick community, and even feedback on some of the sermons that we've done on theology. So you may recall, like, we've done a couple of sermons this year looking at relatively dense and specific theological topics. And there was a theme in this feedback, and that theme was along the lines of really appreciating the ideas and wanting to live with that kind of distinctive Christian practical theology or Christian worldview, but finding it quite difficult to implement in the trenches of everyday life. So people, myself included, struggling with the how. How do you actually live this stuff out? So we're toying with the idea of having a sermon series next year that's very practical in nature, where we can maybe look at different ideas and approaches as to how to live like this. Basically, how to answer the following questions. How to do life in deep and thick community that's together trying to follow Jesus in a sustainable fashion. And how do you actually go about that in your particular context? Because all of us here are currently in different contexts. You may be trying to raise a family, you may be single, you may be like a retired couple. It's going to look different for you than it is for me, I'd suggest. And then how do you do this when life can already feel busy, harried, and completely full of good things a lot of the time, let alone the challenging and difficult things? And again, when the overall culture can start to be feeling like it's getting just a little hostile towards Christianity. They're the questions that, if I stay up at night, if I'm kept up at night, it's those kind of questions that are doing the rounds in my head. That's the stuff that I'm really working through. So more personally, like I've shared up here before, I struggle with busyness. I struggle with being overcommitted in terms of my time and my headspace. And I feel often like I'm stretched and shallow. So maybe like many of you, or some of you at least, doing too many things and as a result, doing them badly and poorly, if you like. So not giving the important things and causes in my life what they're due. So this broad topic of being too busy, too harried on the one hand, and also trying to live and raise a family in the midst of a deep and thick community over here, a community that are trying to follow Jesus together in a sustainable fashion, it's one that really matters to me. It's on my mind a lot. Maybe some of you can relate to the following. I often feel this disjuncture, this disconnection between my head and my heart. And for the purpose of this example, my heart represents what I feel and what I do. And my head is all about what I know in a kind of cognitive, rational fashion. So some examples of this disjuncture between the two. My head tells me that my fundamental worth is found as a child of God. But my heart still so often chases that sense of self-esteem in what I do, in how I perform, in what I have. My head will tell me to consistently put God first, to love and to follow him primarily. But my heart, it often turns to just pleasing people for all the wrong reasons, out of fear or out of just like stoking my ego. My head, it knows, it's relatively smart, it's not too bad, it knows that trying to have it all, to chase every good option, it's a fool's errand. It tells me that I should do fewer things, do them well, and know why I do them. But my heart, it'll still lead me, it'll convince me that I can, fit in that extra appointment, despite it eventually making me late and stressed. Or my heart will tell me, come on, like the extra purchase is worth it, even though it's going to mean that I have to work harder or longer. So I know that there's a disconnect between my head and my heart. And I know that that's always going to be part of the struggle of following Jesus. That's always part of the deal of discipleship. But I wonder still if there's something more that can be done to help close that gap. So I've been doing a bit of reading on things like habits and routines. And I'm thinking that this is a way to try and close that gap more and more between the head and the heart. And a lot of what's going to come out in this sermon today, it's from the work of a guy called Justin Earl Whitley, to give credit where it's due. He wrote a couple of really good books, and a lot of this is from his book, The Common Rule, which is a fantastic little read. So much of our life is routine. It's habit. It's autopilot. Most of us, I think it's fair to say, are creatures of habits. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense that we often fall back on routines and habits because it saves us time. It saves us headspace. So some research that I read that I came across, it cites that up to 40% of our waking hours are on autopilot. We don't have to make the same decisions day in, day out from scratch. It saves us from that decision fatigue. But as you be aware, the risk with habits and routines is that they can be picked up unintentionally and thoughtlessly. So, do you put the chocolate and tomato sauce in the fridge or do you leave it at room temperature? Now, of course, it's the latter if you've got any kind of taste, class and discernment. But you do that not because you're naturally classy and sophisticated, but it's probably because you inherited that from your family of origin. Like that's just a habit, a routine that you picked up. Or your habits are geared towards the path of least resistance. You do something because it's easy and because it's probably, it plays to your physiology. So, why do so many of us check our phones, our email, our Facebook first thing in the morning? Now, chances are you aren't going to come across that email or that post that's going to change your life. That's probably not going to happen. We do it because it's easy and it's some novel stimulation that gives us just the slightest little dose of dopamine. It makes us feel good, like just to a tiny degree. That's why we do it, like for really no good reason. So the big idea here is that habits and routines are powerful, and we can use them intentionally and wisely to close that gap and to love God and people better, or we can just go with whatever we've inherited or whatever is most easy and popular. And that matters because over time, those habits, those routines, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, decade to decade, they are forming us as people. And if you're part of a family right now, then they are forming that family as well. Now, religion and spirituality, it seems to have always recognised the power of the habit, of the routine. And so they've tried to harness it. So you're probably aware, they've called them disciplines. They've gone under the name of practices, their rhythms, or even liturgy. So regardless of what they're called, they're all about forming people intentionally. They recognise that how we live is more often caught than taught. It involves that head component for sure, the knowledge that we have to imbibe, that is consciously taught to us. But then that knowledge, it has to be embodied. It has to be lived out. It has to be practiced. You have to get the reps in, as they say, for it to be caught, for it to actually stick. But of course, this means if you take on a spiritual discipline or a habit, it's going to cost you. Because there are other things that you could be doing with that time, that headspace and effort. And if your spiritual disciplines or habits, if they say require fasting of any kind, or if they require putting limits on yourself, it's going to feel like you're restricting your freedom. I don't know much about Eastern Orthodoxy, but out of the little that I do know, is that if you subscribe to that version of Christianity, and you're orthodox about it, then you're going to be following a fasting calendar. So in this fasting calendar, you probably can't make it out from there, but that's going to predetermine what you can and can't eat for most of the days of the year. They have fast days, they have feast days, they have days when you can have your dairy and you can have your meat, and plenty of days when you don't. And if you sign up to this, if you voluntarily sign up to this, then that is you laying down your freedom, your liberty, as to what you're going to imbibe that day. And it's all mapped out for you. So you give that stuff up. And that feeling of restricting your freedom, it can run up against the spirit of the age at the moment. That spirit of the age that is all about personal autonomy and freedom. So one good, I guess, like way of summarising the spirit of the age, something like this. I'm not fully human without my freedom of choice in every moment. The good life, the vision of the good life, comes from choosing what you want. But that's not really a classic Christian truth. That's not. Just as we read in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve didn't trust the limitations that God gave them as humans. Despite giving them authority, despite giving them responsibility and all the good gifts of creation, they wanted absolute freedom. They wanted to take the fruit from the one tree that God forbade. They thought they knew better. There was seemingly only one limit, and they wanted to transcend that and become limitless. And that hasn't worked out for us. Now you contrast that example of Adam and Eve with the example of Christ from Philippians 2. He joyfully adopts and accepts limits on himself. He incarnates and becomes one of us. And he does that out of love for us, his people, and God. So that's the model. Not this, but accepting our creaturely limitations and orienting our life towards those great ends of loving God and loving others. That's freedom, I think, because that's living as we were designed and created to live. The other idea of freedom, this idea of freedom of choice in every moment with ideally no limits, that's exhausting, that's paralysing. That's so many options out there that we can become so easily overwhelmed and make ourselves actually vulnerable to other people and other powers that'll start making decisions for us. So I reckon we've all been there. It's late. You've made so many decisions all day at work or with the family. You're perusing Amazon Prime and you're half asleep, and maybe it's the Black Friday sales, and suddenly like that $800 Star Wars Lego sets comes up with the Millennium Falcon. And next thing you know, you've bought it and you're trying to explain it to your partner. You become that middle-aged guy. It's sad, right? And again, like, you think, well, I've got Amazon and I can order anything at any time, and that's complete freedom. But no. You're just being nudged. You're being corralled. You're being algorithmed, if you like. Again, so freedom is not having absolutely no limits. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's operating how we were designed and created to operate. So, back to habits, routines, and spiritual disciplines. And I'll just use the term habits from here on in to cover them all. Think about adopting them intentionally to form us into the people who love God and love others with both our head and our heart. Now, it's important to note, these habits won't make God love us any more than he already does. So these habits aren't about making us right with him. He's already done that through Christ. But these habits help us in following God, in becoming the people that he intended us to be. So this may help. Think about it like this. If the lifelong journey of discipleship is a largely uphill path, then these good habits can serve as handrails and steps. The old term for spiritual habits of formation, the rule, that came from the Latin. And apparently the Latin term that it came from was related to trellis, a trellis. So the rule, the way of life, the discipline, it's a trellis. A trellis doesn't provide the fruit. It can't cause fruit to grow. But a trellis will support the plant or vine and help it be fruitful. And without it, the plant may likely decay, rot, or die. And good habits, some people have described good habits as nets. Nets that catch time. Nets that catch time. I really like this idea. For example, you have the habit of exercising for 30 minutes or reading a good book for 30 minutes a day, or calling every day a family friend or member. If you stick to that, whatever else happens that day, if the entire thing at the end of the day has gone to porridge, if you have done that one thing for 30 minutes or you made that call to a friend or family, you can look back and say, I caught some time there thanks to my routine. This God-given gift, time, I didn't just waste it. It just didn't slip past me. I caught some of it. I did something meaningful. Good habits are nets for catching time. So think about it. What habits do you currently have in place? Because they are bound to be there. The only question is whether they're intentional and thought out or not. Are they providing you with the handrails on the journey to love God and people? Or are they reinforcing unintentionally a life of harriedness and anxiety? Are they fostering that delusion that we can have it all, that we've got no limits, and that our worth is dependent upon what we have and what we do? Again, Justin Noah Whitley had this great quote after reflecting on having a massive panic attack. So he writes about having this acute, out of the blue panic attack, and then trying to mitigate the results and the memory of that panic attack with sleeping pills and alcohol. And he wrote, "The house of my life was decorated with Christian content, but the architecture of my habits was the same as everyone else's." I think that's a great way to describe the gap that can exist between the heart and the head. Our heads can be full of Christian content, Christian speak, Christian cliches, and we need that. We need that truth. But we could do with more than just that as well. Our habits, our routines, the patterns of our lives, they should reflect that. They shouldn't be the same as everyone else's. So to move on to part two, I just want to look at a suggested starting habit. And this may just be a variation of what a lot of you are doing already. But this is one that doesn't come easy to me. It's a habit that I'm trying to build into my life with slow but steady, I think, well, I was going to say success, but that sounds way too grandiose. I was going to say I'm getting better at it, but even that sounds grandiose. I'm getting less bad at it. and that is daily prayer. Daily prayer. So God created the world through words. They were used to speak creation into being. Humans, we believe, are made in his image. And our words have an echo, like just an echo of that same power. We see that Adam gave names to all the animals. And our words can create, can form, can influence. So it makes sense to punctuate our days with words to help create, to help form, to help influence. Everything that happens in between. Do you guys ever wake up wanting something? Thinking about it, I usually do. I wake up wishing I'd gotten more sleep. Or I wake up wishing and wanting that I hadn't stayed up late binge watching. I wake up wishing that I'd gotten that thing done last night so I wouldn't have to do it this morning. I don't usually wake up thankful and grateful, but wanting. And for bonus points, I often wake up either thinking of something I could have, should have done, and or worried, concerned, petrified at what I have to do with the oncoming day. So, on a bad day, I can wake up feeling guilty and or anxious and stressed. Now note, either way, the focus is on me, right off the bat. Not God, not others, but me. Or I wake up and immediately I'm 2 shots worried that I've missed something critical in my inbox and 1 shot bored. And that can lead me straight to my phone. Right now I'm trying to avoid social media as much as possible, but it's difficult. And between that and even just old-fashioned email and chat groups, I can pretty easily be nudged towards feeling cynical and or envious about people. Like, that person's life, it can't really be that good, surely. What a faker, what a phony. Or that person's life can't really be that bad. What a drama queen or king. Or maybe that person's life really is that good. Where did I go wrong? Like, none of those are good responses. So you can see where this is going, right? I need to get my focus off myself and ill thoughts towards others and instead firmly on God. First thing, hence prayer. Whitley points out that the essence of prayer, ideally, is to stand alongside God and name what is. That is, remind ourselves of truths about God and ourselves. And alongside that, name up what should be. In other words, your will be done. Your will be done. So starting my day like this will help counter any half-truths and lies that I tell myself and wanting what definitely shouldn't be. It's a great way to set up the day. And as I may have mentioned up here before, the suggestion is to say these prayers whilst kneeling, assuming that you can. Now, this may seem like such a strange practice to our ears, but it's an example, I think, of your body leading where you want your heart and mind to follow. The posture of kneeling is a reminder of my dependency and reliance upon God. And it's a position that I so rarely take in the rest of my life that is jarring and it's a little uncomfortable. And that's maybe not a bad thing, especially first thing in the morning. Now, what might you pray? And I think almost anything for the sake of this exercise. Anything that gets eyes off ourselves and instead onto loving God and others. Me, I'm often groggy and under-caffeinated, so I like this little book which contains a bunch of rote prayers. Some timeless truths about God that I read aloud, and then there's prompts for fill in the blank kind of prayers for other people. So you may have a list of people that you're praying for over a specific duration, e.g. while they're going through some kind of hard time. Or they may be constant, people who you constantly pray for, close family or friends, for example. Or you might go through our prayer directory, which is fantastic, a way just to kind of clue in and remember people who are also part of the spiritual family, pray for them. Or maybe you give yourself 1 minute silence to meditate, to reflect, or listen for any prompting of the Holy Spirit. Regardless, I think, again, in this instance, what you pray for and how long it goes for, it's almost secondary. The main point is that you're becoming someone over time who more often than not starts their day with prayer. You're building some really powerful handrails and stairs for the spiritual journey that you're on. You've got yourself a good net to catch some time with. It's hard to think of a better way to start the day. I don't think it has to take long, personally. I do it after making the first hot drink of the day and feeding the dog, which is the very, very first things I do in the morning because I don't want to be mauled and lose a limb whilst praying. So that's important. And I try and follow that advice of not checking phone or email, etc., as that's my default. I don't want to do that for the reasons mentioned before. It's just not helpful at all. If prayer is a net, then all this stuff, it's just a black hole for time. It's a great way to make time disappear. And it doesn't leave my day very well set up if I start with the phone or email. So, throughout Christian history, the spiritual greats have advocated for set prayer times during the day and also like last thing at night. And this is still very much an ideal for me, praying last thing at night. It's yet to become like a reality. But the night makes a lot of sense to me because, again, if you're anything like me, it's just too easy to review the day and rue the fact, perhaps, that you didn't get more done. It's tempting to, as they say, I should have, all over yourself. Should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done that. And that's handy up to a point in terms of reviewing that day. But if you leave that impulse unchecked, it can mutate into just some crippling guilt and disappointment. Or, given how tired, how spent, and how vulnerable we are at night, you may just want to do all the wrong things to escape some of those unpleasant feelings. Eating too much, drinking too much, watching the wrong stuff, etc. Instead, we've got the option to bring all that stuff to God in prayer. And again, it's a reminder of the truth. I'm a human. I'm a creature. I'm finite and I have limits. You're God. You're good. You're powerful. You love me in this world that you made. I can trust and follow you. So the encouragement is to punctuate your day with prayer, or at least bookmark the start and the finish. It can be rote. It can be brief. It can feel like you're just colouring by numbers and punching the clock sometimes. But again, that doesn't really matter for the sake of this exercise, because a habit is building. As they say, pray your prayers until I pray you. Pray your prayers until I pray you. Which I had to think about for a long time to make any sense out of that whatsoever. It didn't make any, I couldn't work out what they meant by that. But maybe it means that eventually, just by sheer repetition, saying the same things out loud, the truths out loud, and by God's grace, those truths that we say out loud will replace all that unhelpful chatter and self-talk that normally runs around our heads, or at least my head. This may all sound simple and easy, and I certainly agree with that first part, but not the second. Try it. And if you're already doing some kind of equivalent, please keep it up and encourage others to do so. I'm still too inconsistent, way too inconsistent, but what I've found is that my days generally go better if they start that way. And there's been enough proof in the pudding now that I miss it if I don't start my day that way. I actually notice the difference. And particularly if you're a young person, this is a fantastic opportunity for you, like to start building this habit now. It's a chance for you to get on the good foot. You've got not so many years of bad habits of starting the days without praying. You've got none of that to unwind. It's a great time to start building that net, building that trellis here and now. If you want any other suggested resources on what and how to pray, please hit me up or another member of the leadership team or an experienced member of this church. But the big point is this. True freedom is living the way that we were created for, to love and serve God and others. And habits, they're so powerful. They can either help this, they can form us in this particular direction, or they can push us the other way. They can leave us harried, stressed, and again, believing the delusion that we're limitless. And that won't lead to life. It certainly won't lead to life to the full. Okay, thanks. But now let me pray. Father, I thank you that you haven't left us alone. I thank you for your Holy Spirit. I thank you for your Son, and I thank you for your word. And again, I thank you for each other. I pray that we will over time just reflect on and be really intentional about the habits, these almost unseen, unintended, and often just left behind routines that permeate everyday life and that are forming us one way or another, Father. I pray that we'll be more intentional and conscious about these. I pray that we'll live a conscious and informed life without falling into relying on these to think that this is how we get on your good side, or that we can possibly earn any more of your love. Help us see these and value them for what they are. And I pray you'll be with all these good folk here as they tackle the upcoming week and the upcoming months and the upcoming season too, Father. Help us again be good ambassadors for you, I pray. Amen.